The ground trembles. Artillery shells scream overhead, tearing the desert night into fragments of fire and darkness. Lieutenant Giuseppe Maretti crouches behind a disabled M13/40, his throat raw with sand and cordite smoke. Through the haze, he watches them. British Crusader tanks, hull down on the ridgeline, silhouetted against burning fuel dumps. They should be moving, advancing, but they're stationary, waiting. Then he sees it. Vapor, rising from commanders hatch in thin, impossible wisps. The North African campaign transforms men into creatures of dust and desperation. By autumn 1942, the Western Desert has become a graveyard of steel, burned-out panzers, shattered Italian CV, 33 tankettes, and the skeletal remains of supply trucks scattered across endless expanses of sand. The Regio Esercito, Italy's Royal Army, fights alongside their German allies in conditions that seem designed by a malicious god, temperatures soaring to 120 degrees Fahrenheit by day, plummeting to near freezing at night. Sandstorms that strip paint from metal and skin from bone. Lieutenant Giuseppe Maretti commands a platoon of the Aride Armored Division, veterans of Tobruk and Gazala. They are good soldiers, proud men who've learned to survive on minimal rations, contaminated water, and a thin hope that Rommel's Africa Corps might somehow turn the tide. But survival in the desert isn't just about tactics or courage, it's about water. Every drop becomes sacred. Canteens are guarded like treasure. Men dream not of home, not of women, but of clean, cold water sliding down their throats. The British Eighth Army, opposing them across the minefields and wire obstacles of El Alamein, faces the same brutal environment. But the Italians have begun to notice something peculiar about their enemy. British tank crews seem comfortable, not happy. No one is happy in this hellscape, but unnaturally functional. Alert, their movements deliberate, their fire discipline excellent even after hours of combat. Maretti first hears the rumors from a captured British soldier, a gunnery sergeant from the Royal Tank Regiment, wounded during a probe near Kidney Ridge. The man, waiting for medical evacuation, accepts a cigarette from an Italian corporal and makes casual conversation despite his shrapnel wounds. "You lot must be gasping out here," the sergeant says, his accent thick with Lancashire vowels. "No proper brew for weeks, I'd wager." The interpreter translates. Maretti frowns. "Brew. Tea, mate. Can't fight a war without tea." The Italian soldiers exchange glances. One laughs, a short, bitter sound. They haven't had coffee in 3 weeks, let alone tea. Their rations consist of hardtack biscuits, tinned meat of dubious origin, and water so heavily chlorinated it burns the tongue. "You have tea?" Maretti asks through the interpreter. The British sergeant grins despite his pain. "In the tank, yeah. Always. Got a boiling vessel, haven't we? Brew up whenever we fancy." The interpreter struggles with the phrase. Boiling vessel. The Italians understand the individual words, but cannot parse their combination into meaning. A vessel that boils inside a tank? Impossible. Tanks are furnaces. Adding heat deliberately would be madness. But the sergeant insists. He describes a metal container, electrically heated, mounted inside the turret. Water boiled in minutes. Tea, cocoa, soup, whatever the crew desires. Hot meals without exposing themselves to enemy fire. The Italians dismiss it as British humor. A joke at their expense. No army would waste resources on such frivolity. 3 days after the conversation with the captured sergeant, Maretti's platoon participates in a desperate counterattack near Tel El Akakar. The assault collapses within an hour. British Shermans and Grants pour accurate fire into the advancing Italian armor, and German 88mm guns provide insufficient cover. Maretti's M13/40 takes a hit to the track assembly. Not fatal, but immobilizing. His crew abandons the vehicle and retreats on foot through a landscape transformed into an iron storm. As darkness falls, the firing slackens. Both sides pause, exhausted, gathering strength for the next day's slaughter. Maretti and 4 of his men find shelter in a wadi, a dry stream bed that offers concealment from prowling aircraft and roving patrols. They are trapped between the lines, unable to retreat safely until morning. Water. Corporal Benedetti croaks. His canteen is empty. So are the others. Maretti makes a decision. Half a kilometer to the west, he spotted a knocked-out British Crusader during the retreat. If they can reach it unseen, they might scavenge water, ammunition, perhaps even food. The British are notorious for well-stocked vehicles, a legacy of their supply lines stretching back to Alexandria and Cairo. They move through the darkness like ghosts, using shell holes for cover, freezing whenever flares burst overhead. The Crusader sits alone, abandoned, its turret canted at an odd angle. No bodies nearby. The crew escaped or were evacuated. Maretti approaches cautiously, Beretta pistol drawn, expecting booby traps. The desert has taught him paranoia. But the tank is clean, abandoned in haste, not rigged. Benedetti climbs onto the hull and levers open the commander's hatch. The interior reeks of oil, sweat, and something else, something unexpected. Madonna Santa, Benedetti whispers. Maretti climbs up beside him. Inside the turret, illuminated by moonlight filtering through vision slits, he sees a small metal box mounted near the gunner's position. Cylindrical, perhaps 12 inches tall, with electrical wires running to the tank's battery system. And beside it, stacked neatly, tins of tea, cocoa powder, condensed milk, sugar cubes. The British sergeant wasn't joking. Benedetti reaches in and retrieves the device. It's surprisingly simple, a heating element wrapped around a central water chamber, with a hinged lid and a spout. British military markings are stamped into the metal. BV, 1941, War Department. It's real, Maretti says, his voice hollow with disbelief. They brew tea in their tanks, Benedetti finishes. The other soldiers crowd around, staring at the device as if it's an artifact from another planet. In this moment, the war contracts to a single point of absurdity. Men are dying over resources, oil fields, ports, supply routes, and the British have engineered a system to make hot beverages inside armored combat vehicles. Private Russo, the youngest of the group, begins to laugh. Not the bitter laugh of earlier, but something edged with hysteria. We're losing, he says. We're losing to an army that stops for tea. Maretti doesn't contradict him, because standing in the moonlit desert, holding a boiling vessel in his hands, he understands something fundamental. This device isn't about tea. It's about an entirely different philosophy of war. The British aren't just fighting to win. They're fighting to maintain their humanity in the process. They've calculated that keeping their soldiers fed, warm, and caffeinated outweighs the industrial cost of equipping every tank with a kettle. The Italians, meanwhile, are lucky to receive ammunition. The development of the boiling vessel didn't emerge from luxury or eccentricity. It was born from blood. In 1940 and 1941, during the early campaigns in France and North Africa, British tank crews faced a lethal dilemma. Combat in armor warfare is not continuous. It consists of bursts of intense action followed by lulls, sometimes lasting hours, as both sides regroup, resupply, and reposition. During these lulls, tank crews need to eat, drink, and rest. But brewing tea or heating rations required a fire, which meant leaving the tank. The statistics were damning. British Army operational research teams, analyzing casualty reports from the 7th Armored Division and other units, discovered a pattern. Tank crewmen were being killed or wounded at alarming rates during supposedly quiet periods. Snipers, artillery airbursts, strafing aircraft, enemies who targeted vulnerable soldiers clustered around small cooking fires beside their vehicles. The cost wasn't just human. Each trained tank crew represented thousands of hours of instruction, months of combat experience, and institutional knowledge that couldn't be easily replaced. Losing a crew because they wanted a cup of tea was strategically indefensible. In 1941, British engineers at the Fighting Vehicles Research and Development Establishment tackled the problem. The solution needed to be simple, reliable, electrically powered, tanks at batteries, and capable of boiling water quickly. The result was the boiling vessel, essentially a military-grade electric kettle hardened combat conditions. By 1942, production accelerates. The BV becomes standard equipment in Crusaders, Matildas, Valentines, and later Shermans and Cromwells. Each unit can boil approximately 1 pint of water in 6 to 8 minutes, enough for 4 cups of tea or 2 tins of soup. The design incorporates safety features: automatic shutoff to prevent dry burning, secure mounting to withstand the violent motion of cross-country travel, and weather-sealed electrical connections. The tactical impact is immediate and measurable. Casualty rates among tank crews during operational pauses drop significantly. Crews remain inside their armor during lulls, maintaining better situational awareness, responding more quickly to renewed contact. The ability to brew hot drinks also addresses a subtler problem: morale. Soldiers who can maintain small comforts, a hot cup of tea, a warm meal, fight more effectively than those reduced to purely survival conditions. But there's another dimension. The British Army has always understood that tea is more than a beverage. It's a ritual, a psychological anchor. In moments of chaos, the act of brewing tea imposes order. It transforms a tank crew from frightened men hiding inside steel into soldiers taking a deliberate break, confident enough in their position to pause for refreshment. This psychology is alien to the Italian and German soldiers opposing them. Both Axis armies emphasize different virtues: stoic endurance for the Italians, aggressive forward momentum for the Germans. The idea of stopping mid-battle for tea strikes them as either magnificent arrogance or incomprehensible foolishness. Word spreads through the Italian positions like wildfire. Soldiers who've captured British vehicles, scavenged battlefield wreckage, or interrogated prisoners all confirm the same incredible fact. The British brew tea inside their tanks, not in the rear areas, not at supply depots, but in the front lines, under fire. For men like Maretti and his comrades, this revelation catalyzes a crisis of understanding. They've been trained to view the enemy through certain lenses. The British as stolid, unimaginative, rigidly disciplined. But this doesn't fit. This suggests an army that's thought deeply about how to keep its soldiers effective, that's invested resources not just in weapons, but in welfare. The contrast is stark. Italian tank crews in the M13/40 endure horrific conditions. The tanks are mechanically unreliable, under-armored, and undergunned compared to British models. Ventilation is poor. Interior temperatures regularly exceed 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Rations are inadequate. Water is scarce. The Italian logistical system, strained by distance and Allied interdiction, struggles to provide basic necessities, let alone luxuries. German crews fare better, but they too view the British tea system with bemused contempt. To the Wehrmacht, war is Bürgerkrieg, war of movement, aggression, speed. The idea of pausing for beverages seems antithetical to proper military spirit. They see it as evidence of British softness, an inability to embrace the harsh realities of total war. But after Alamein, as Rommel's forces retreat westward and the Eighth Army pursues, perceptions begin to shift. The British don't fight like a soft army. Their artillery barges are devastating. Their infantry assaults are methodical and relentless. Their tank crews, far from being pampered, display exceptional endurance during extended operations. Captured Italian officers, awaiting transport to POW camps in Egypt, have time to observe their captors more closely. They notice that British soldiers, while not happy, seem less physically degraded than their own men. Eyes are brighter. Response times quicker. The difference isn't dramatic. War exhausts everyone, but it's measurable. One Italian captain, an engineer by training, asks his British counterpart about the boiling vessel. The conversation, translated and later recorded in his diary, reveals the fundamental difference in approach. "You must understand," the British major explains, "that we're not fighting a 6-month war. We're fighting a 6-year war, maybe longer. We need soldiers who can sustain effort over time. A man who's properly fed, properly rested, and properly warmed fights better than one who's not. It's quite simple, really." The Italian captain nods, but privately thinks it's not simple at all. It requires an industrial base that can afford such refinements. It requires a military bureaucracy that considers soldier welfare a strategic priority. It requires confidence. And that's the heart of it. The boiling vessel is a statement of intent. It says, we expect to be here for the long haul. We will maintain our standards. We will not be reduced to pure survival. By November 1942, Rommel's Afrika Korps and the Italian forces are in full retreat after the decisive British victory at El Alamein. The pursuit stretches across Libya, a grinding advance through the same desert landscapes that witnessed earlier Axis victories. Now the tables have turned. British supply lines shorten while Axis logistics collapse. Fuel shortages immobilize tanks. Ammunition runs low. Water becomes critically scarce for the retreating army. Maretti's unit, what remains of it, retreats westward. They've abandoned their M13/40S, no fuel, no spare parts. Now they travel in requisitioned trucks, German half-tracks, even captured British vehicles when available. The irony isn't lost on Maretti. They're retreating in enemy equipment, burning enemy fuel. During a brief halt near Benghazi, Maretti's group occupies a captured British supply depot, hastily abandoned during the earlier Axis advance in 1941. Among the rusted tins and rotted canvas, they find a cache of boiling vessels, a dozen units, still in their original packaging, overlooked during the chaotic retreat. Benedetti holds one up. Should we take them? The question hangs in the air. They have no tanks to install them in. Their vehicles, a motley collection of half-functional transports, lack the electrical systems to power the devices. The BVs are useless to them, dead weight. But Maretti takes one anyway. He wraps it carefully in a blanket and stows it in his pack. A souvenir. A reminder. Of what? Benedetti asks. Maretti doesn't answer immediately. He's thinking about the difference between armies, about what it means to fight for a nation that considers soldier comfort worth engineering effort, about the disparity between Italian and British industrial capacity, between fascist rhetoric and democratic pragmatism. Finally, a reminder that we're not fighting the same kind of war. The retreat continues, through Tripoli into Tunisia, where fresh American forces enter the fight. The Axis pocket shrinks. By May 1943, it's over. 250,000 Axis soldiers surrender in Tunisia, including what remains of Maretti's unit. In the POW camp near Bizerta, waiting for transport to camps in America or Britain, the Italian soldiers have time to reflect. They trade stories, compare experiences, try to make sense of their defeat. The conversations often circle back to small details, seemingly trivial moments that somehow encapsulate larger truths. Maretti still has the boiling vessel. He shows it to other prisoners, tells the story of finding it in the Crusader, explains how it works. The device becomes a curiosity, passed from hand to hand, examined by men who fought an entire war without such conveniences. Do you think it made a difference? A young officer asks. Do you think tea kettles won the war? Maretti considers the question seriously. No, he says finally. Tea kettles didn't win the war, but they're a symptom of why we lost. The young officer doesn't understand. Maretti tries to explain. It's not about the kettle. It's about an army that can afford to think about kettles, that has the resources, the planning, the industrial depth to worry about whether its soldiers can brew tea safely. We were fighting just to get ammunition to the front. They were optimizing crew efficiency through hydration and morale. We weren't in the same war. The story of the boiling vessel doesn't end with the North African campaign. The device becomes a permanent fixture of British armored warfare, retained through subsequent conflicts, Italy, Northwest Europe, Korea, even into the modern era. Current British main battle tanks, the Challenger II, still incorporate descendants of the original 1941 design, electrically heated water boilers that allow crews to prepare food and beverages without leaving their vehicles. The institutional commitment to this seemingly minor detail reflects a broader British military philosophy. Equipment should support the soldier, not just arm him. This approach manifests in numerous ways. Attention to ergonomics in vehicle design, emphasis on crew comfort during development, sophisticated logistics that prioritize soldier welfare alongside ammunition and fuel delivery. For the Italian soldiers who encountered the BV, during the North African campaign. It became a symbol of their own army's shortcomings. Post-war memoirs and histories written by Regio Esercito veterans frequently mention the device, always with a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration. It represented everything they lacked: industrial capacity, logistical sophistication, and a military culture that treated soldiers as valuable assets requiring maintenance rather than expendable resources to be consumed. Giuseppe Maretti survives the war. He returns to Italy in 1946, after 3 years in British POW camps, first in Egypt, then in Scotland. He brings the boiling vessel home with him, a peculiar souvenir that sits on a shelf in his small apartment in Turin. Visitors who notice it prompt a story, which he tells without embellishment: the discovery in the abandoned tank, the realization of what it meant, the long retreat that followed. In 1963, a British military historian researching the North African campaign interviews Maretti. The historian is gathering first-hand accounts from Italian veterans, trying to understand the Axis perspective. When Maretti shows him the boiling vessel, the Englishman laughs, a warm, surprised sound. "Good God, you kept it?" "I kept it," Maretti confirms. "It seemed important." Important how? Maretti struggles to articulate 2 decades of reflection. Finally, "In the desert, we thought you were mad, stopping to make tea while people were shooting at you. It seemed like arrogance, or stupidity, but it wasn't either, was it?" The historian shakes his head. "No, it was practical. Dead men can't fight. Dehydrated, exhausted men fight poorly. Keep the crew alive, alert, and reasonably comfortable, and they perform better." Sounds simple, but most armies struggle with it. "Most armies can't afford it," Maretti says quietly. The historian nods. This is the truth both men understand but rarely acknowledge. War is ultimately about resources: industrial, logistical, economic. The side that can afford to worry about tea kettles is usually the side with overwhelming material superiority. The BV wasn't a game changer, wasn't a war-winning technology, but it was an indicator, a symptom of deeper advantages. The boiling vessel story has entered military folklore, a favorite anecdote among historians and military enthusiasts. It appears in documentaries, books, and museum exhibits as evidence of British eccentricity, the nation that brought civilization to warfare, that refused to abandon tea even in the chaos of battle. But beneath the humor lies serious military science. Modern armed forces have validated the principles the BV embodied. Sustained operations require sustained soldiers. The U.S. Army's development of MREs, meals ready to eat, with self-heating capabilities, the inclusion of hot beverage preparation equipment in modern armored vehicles across multiple nations, the emphasis on crew comfort in vehicle design, all trace lineage to the same insight that produced the 1941 boiling vessel. Research into combat effectiveness consistently demonstrates that properly fed, hydrated, and rested soldiers outperform their malnourished, exhausted counterparts by significant margins. The difference isn't marginal, it's fundamental. Reaction times, decision-making quality, weapon accuracy, and tactical judgment all degrade rapidly under conditions of sustained deprivation. The British Army's decision to invest in crew welfare equipment wasn't sentimental, it was coldly rational. The cost of equipping thousands of tanks with BVs was negligible compared to the cost of replacing casualties, retraining crews, and suffering reduced combat effectiveness. This calculation, obvious in retrospect, wasn't universally accepted in the 1940s. Many military establishments viewed soldier comfort as an indulgence, a distraction from the serious business of war. The North African campaign provided empirical evidence. British tank units equipped with boiling vessels demonstrated measurably better performance during extended operations. Crews remained alert longer, maintained better discipline during lulls, responded more effectively to sudden contact. The advantage wasn't decisive in any single engagement. Tanks still needed armor, guns, and fuel to fight effectively. But across thousands of actions, over years of campaigning, the cumulative effect was substantial. Italian and German observers, initially dismissive, gradually recognized the sophistication behind the apparently frivolous device. Post-war German military analysis of British tactical doctrine specifically cited the BV as an example of superior logistical thinking, the ability to anticipate soldier needs and engineer solutions before problems became critical. For modern armies, the lesson is clear. Technology must serve the human operator. The most sophisticated weapon system is only as effective as the crew operating it, and crew effectiveness depends on fundamentally human factors: food, water, rest, morale. Armies that optimize for these factors gain advantages that compound over time. In a villa outside Turin, in the spring of 1978, Giuseppe Maretti dies peacefully at age 64. His children, sorting through his possessions, find a boiling vessel on its shelf, carefully maintained, lightly oiled to prevent corrosion. Most of them have heard the story at some point, though the younger grandchildren find it hard to believe that armies once fought in deserts without proper water, that men died for want of basic necessities, that a tea kettle could symbolize the difference between victory and defeat. One grandson, a university student studying engineering, asks to keep the device. He's fascinated by its simplicity, the elegant solution to a complex problem, the integration of human factors into military engineering. He writes his thesis on the evolution of soldier welfare technology, using the BV as a case study. The paper wins academic recognition, gets published, adds another small footnote to the device's unlikely legacy. But the real legacy isn't academic. It's practical. It lives in every modern military vehicle that includes provisions for heating food and water. It lives in the doctrines that emphasize sustained operations and crew endurance. It lives in the understanding, now widespread but once revolutionary, that soldiers are not machines. They require maintenance, care, and small comforts to function at peak effectiveness. The Italian soldiers who discovered British tanks brewing tea in the middle of battle experienced a moment of profound cognitive dissonance. Their training, their experience, their entire understanding of warfare couldn't accommodate what they observed. War was supposed to be brutal, stripped of comfort, reduced to pure survival. The British were fighting a different kind of war, one that refused to surrender civilization entirely, that maintained standards even in chaos. This difference, small in any individual instance, accumulated over years into strategic advantage. An army that can worry about tea kettles is an army with deep reserves, sophisticated logistics, and confidence in its eventual victory. An army fighting just to survive, scrambling for basic supplies, focused purely on immediate threats, cannot match that level of operational sustainability. The shock and disbelief Italian soldiers felt wasn't really about tea. It was about confronting the vast disparity in resources, organization, and military culture between the armies. It was about understanding, suddenly and completely, that they were not fighting as equals. October 1942. A desert battlefield in Egypt. Steam rising from a tank hatch while shells explode in the distance. Italian soldiers watching in disbelief as their enemy pauses mid-battle to brew tea. The image seems absurd, almost comic, but strip away the surface, and what remains is a profound truth about modern warfare. Victory belongs not to the most aggressive or the most ideological, but to the most sustainable. The side that can maintain its soldiers' effectiveness over months and years, that can solve small problems before they become large ones, that can afford to think about tea kettles, that side wins. The boiling vessel, a simple electric kettle, became a symbol of this truth. For British crews, it was a daily convenience, unremarkable as a canteen or a compass. For their Italian opponents, it was a revelation, an impossible luxury that exposed the fundamental inequality of their struggle. Maretti kept his captured BV for 35 years, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that wars are won in factories and supply depots as much as on battlefields. A reminder that the side with the resources to sweat the small stuff, to ensure its soldiers can brew tea safely, probably has the resources to win the larger war. The Italian soldiers couldn't believe British tanks brewed tea while under fire, but belief wasn't required. The evidence set before them, undeniable, a metal cylinder, electrically heated, producing steam in the middle of chaos. In that steam rose a simple truth. Some armies could afford civilization, even in war. Others could not.